Hello Mechwarriors, and welcome back to the Mech Lab, where we try to be a better mech commander every day. Today's topic is whether the clans or the inner sphere are a better faction to play as. And the answer to this question is actually fairly nuanced. I think that the inner sphere is better to play in battle value balanced games because they bring more units generally. And having more units allows you to spread out damage amongst those units and allow your guns to remain effective for longer. And the inner sphere generally brings a lot more armor to the field because they bring more units. Now, why is this? Well, the clans pretty much universally have XL engines in their mechs, and they also usually have endosteel and ferrofibrous. This is why some of the second line mechs, such as the Night Chanter, are quite popular, because they end up being a little bit cheaper than other clan mechs. They have less overall tonnage to put towards guns, which ends up giving them more points to play with. For demonstration purposes on this video, I've put together two 10,000 battle value forces in the clan invasion era. One is Draconis Combine, and the other one is Clan. The DCMS are bringing two chargers for cheap armor to shove in the enemy's face, as well as a guillotine and a black knight to act as line mechs to go behind the heavy cavalry type force. A Venom is a backstabber slash flanker, highly efficient unit, cheap on battle value with high piloting so that it can kick people. And then we've just got a 4/5 awesome 9Q, big heavy armor brick with lots of PPCs that can bring some support fire to bear. On the other end of things, we have 4 clan mechs. We have one heavy armor brick, the Gargoyle Prime. This is mostly here because it's cheap and fairly durable. We've got the Adder with 2 LRM-20s acting as a support unit. The Nobori Nin does the same thing with an LRM-10 and 2 large pulse lasers, and a Mad Cat S variant, which has a large pulse laser and a crap ton of SRMs along with a couple of medium pulses. The clan force, as is pretty typical, has a lot more mobility than the inner sphere. And again, as usual, they've taken a couple of units of battle armor, elementals, to essentially act as a cheap armor soak that can also put some pressure on enemy mechs by using flamers or leg attacks. This is something that I think every clan player needs to understand. Because their mechs are so expensive, taking battle armor is pretty much essential. You need that cheap extra bulk that can sit on an objective and prevent enemies from scoring and discourage them from just hanging out there. Meanwhile, your long-range support units are going to do what they do best. They sit in the back and they lay down fire, and because all of these units are fairly mobile, the Puma's 6'9", and the Mad Cat and the Huntsman are both 5'8", they can use their mobility to fight at advantageous range bands. Most of the inner sphere list is going to probably want to get on top of you, and this is an egregious example because it has 2 chargers, but that's pretty much the case always. Clans have greater range and greater mobility, while the inner sphere brings a lot more armor and close range efficient weapons like medium lasers to the table. So inner sphere should pretty much always just do miserable metal mountain strategy. In my opinion, that's what they're good at. Big mechs, lots of armor, close range weapons like medium lasers in abundance. You want to rush down the enemy, brawl with them, and win that way. Use melee attacks, all that kind of stuff. So what does this mean in terms of which one is better? I would say that it actually depends upon skill level. If you have a very highly skilled player who's good at measuring threat ranges and using mobility and range to their advantage, they can play much more successfully using the finesse of the clans to pretty much always get much better target numbers than the inner sphere, avoid a lot of incoming damage, and hit the inner sphere player with pulse lasers and long-range weapons like LRMs. Meanwhile, their elementals and whatever cheap armor bricks that they have, it's usually the Gargoyle Prime. Almost every clan list that I see brought to a tournament has a Gargoyle Prime, specifically because it's fairly cheap and like it doesn't bring much in the way of guns, but it has lots of armor and structure. It's 5'8", so it can get pretty good TMM, meaning that it's very easy to get it to the objective and stay there for quite a while. Whereas newer players can make a lot more mistakes because they have so many more units. If you lose one charger because you make a movement mistake and get in range and a bunch of clan mechs and elementals get on top of it and blow it up, well, I mean, that's only 1,000 battle value that you've lost out of your force. That's not that big of a deal. Even if you mishandle the Ostrock, well, that thing's got enough armor that it can take quite a few hits. So even if the enemy goes after it and manages to kite you and deal a lot of damage to you while you can't do much to them in return, eventually you're going to corner them in the map somewhere, and they're not going to be able to get away anymore, and you'll be able to get your medium lasers, your large lasers, SRM packs, all those really efficient weapons into that close range, range 6, range 10 for the large lasers. They're going to be able to get those into range eventually, especially if you're playing around a central objective where the clans are eventually going to have to come to you, which is, I think, how everyone should play, because otherwise it turns into skirmishing, and it's really difficult for the Inner Sphere player to deal with that kind of thing. They're much better at getting onto an objective and holding it than the clans are, but their weaknesses start to show when you're only bringing these 4-6 movement units and you're just going to get completely outflanked. The clans are going to use jump jets and their superior speed to move into forests, get onto the edges of your formation, where, you know, you're going to have the awesome in the back as an anchor, and the slightly faster mechs like the Guillotine and the Black Knight will be in the middle, and then you'll have the Ostrock and Chargers moving together and the Venom maybe moving up a flank. That awesome is going to get outranged really badly because the clans are just going to stay at range 14 of it, where it can only make shots at long range while it's probably running so that it can try and get into range. Meanwhile, the clans have like pulse lasers and stuff. Now, this is all ignoring putting limitations on weaponry, because this list would violate the MRC's normal tournament packages because it has so many pulse lasers. But that is one of the biggest strengths of the clans, that they can bring the large pulse laser. It is such an incredibly efficient brawling weapon, and the clans also can bring very light LRMs because they weigh half as much as Inner Sphere LRMs and don't have a minimum range. It's really hard to punish an LRM boat. Like, you can charge down a Puma with your units, sure, but it's going to blast you with 2 LRM-20s at point-blank range. Once you get into that range 7, it's gonna just be hitting on like probably 6s, maybe 7s, depending on if it's moved or if you have cover. Now, you might say that I made a sort of an unfair list here because I upped the gunnery on all of the clan mechs, so obviously that's going to be more expensive. But if we look at the cheapest Timberwolf that they have, the Timberwolf B, this thing has a Gauss rifle and a large pulse laser, LRM-10, SRM-4, and a small pulse laser. It also has Artemis on the 2 launchers, moves 5'8", still has 230 armor. This thing is 2,200 battle value, which is more expensive than an Atlas. Let's say this XL Engine Atlas, which has 2 ER large lasers, LRM-20, and a Gauss rifle. This has roughly comparable long-range firepower, much more armor. Main downside being that it can't actually fire its weapons because it doesn't have enough heat sinks, and it's really slow. One other major advantage that the Inner Sphere has over the clans is that they have command consoles. These things are extremely powerful. +2 to initiative is always really, really good. They have quite a few mechs that are pretty decent that carry them. I like the Orion. LRM-20 and an LB-10 is a great long-range complement, and it's got some brawling weapons as well. Battlemaster with an ERPPC and a bunch of close-range weapons, always good. You got the Grand Dragon ERPPC and an LRM-10 with pretty good movement, and it's quite cheap at 1,300 battle value. The armor is a little bit lacking on a heavy mech, but the movement makes up for it. The Inner Sphere also generally just has more sort of tricks here and there with optional rules, like communications equipment is something that they much more commonly have on like HQ vehicles, which again gives massive initiative bonuses, which is very powerful, especially if you already outnumber the enemy. Having bonus to initiative is really strong because you can get more units into good positions and outflank enemies, get into melee in favorable spots where they can't kick you but you can kick them. So that's my sort of rambling thoughts about which overall faction is better. You could get into more nitty-gritty about which Inner Sphere faction is best to play, and I mean it's pretty much obviously Comstar because they have all of the crazy double heat sinks and stuff before anyone else has access to them. And you could get into a debate about what's the best clan faction. I think it's probably Clan Hell's Horses because they have Transformers, which is pretty sick, but they also have like more tanks, and tanks are much cheaper on battle value than mechs are, which is a huge bonus for the clans. They definitely want to be taking tanks whenever they can because their mechs are so expensive, and it's mainly due to the fact that their weapons are longer range, which increases the battle value by quite a bit of every unit. Because you can look at Inner Sphere mechs that get clan weapons later on, and they're really expensive. For example, here's the Raptor OR. This thing has 2 ER large clan lasers, 2 ER medium clan lasers, and it's a really small light mech with pathetic armor, and it's not even that fast at 711 for a 25 tonner, but it's already 1400 battle value baseline. That's because of the extreme cost of these weapons. So to summarize, I think that the clans are better in the hands of an experienced and skillful commander, assuming that you don't get screwed over by a really lucky shot on the enemy part. If they get a PPC shot to your head on like round 2 and knock out your Mad Cat with a cockpit critical, that's gonna just end the game right there. There's not really much you can do about that, which is again why I have my video about better balance for Battletech, adding things like edge and initiative, streak bonuses, so that you can better balance the game, as well as limiting certain overpowered weapons like the Clan Large Pulse Laser is a good idea pretty much across the board in my opinion. If it's a campaign, it's kind of whatever, but for any kind of pickup match, or if you want to actually do a competitive tournament or event, I definitely recommend watching that video and applying some of those concepts to your own game. But the Inner Sphere is a lot more forgiving, and you're able to bring so many more units and so much more armor that even if you take one of those unlucky headshots or through armor gyro crit, which knocks your Black Knight into the dirt in turn 2, you're still going to be able to bring a lot of your battle value to bear. Like this, again, this is an extreme example, but you've got 2 Chargers which cost 2,000 battle value. They're the same cost as the Man-O-War, and the Man-O-War isn't actually doing that much more than the Charger. It has more guns, but it doesn't have so many more guns that it is going to outdo the endurance of having 2 Chargers on your side. You've got 340 armor on the Chargers, whereas you've got 211 on the Man-O-War. So if you have any thoughts, let me know them in the comments. This is my first video after getting 1,000 subscribers. I'd really like to thank all of you guys for supporting the channel. It's a dream come true. This is fantastic. I never thought that I would even make it this far when I started. So thank you so much for supporting me. If you want to keep supporting, make sure you just leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel, share the content around. If you have any friends who you'd like to convince that one side or the other is better, I think they both have their merits. Particularly elementals are actually really strong, and the Inner Sphere doesn't get access to them. So these are a really great objective holding unit, and also a great area denial unit. Having 11 health on each suit makes them really hard to take out with either big weapons or small ones. So thanks for watching, Mech Warriors, and have a great day.